Be careful.
All right, so really quick, before we kind of move in to the information, I wrote these three things on the board really quick because I think, again, one of the, people always ask whether, like just in the last class, someone asked me, did you love history when I was in high school? And I said, oh, I despised it. I hated history. I loved one class in high school. Guess which one? PE. I loved PE. PE was like I loved PE. Everything else I didn't like at the time. I didn't understand its importance. None of those things. It wasn't until I got older that I began to embrace knowledge as something that's important in order for us to navigate kind of the world effectively. And so as we're doing this today, so we have, roughly about an hour. And, I always get when someone asks the question of, if I'm at home, would I rather read an encyclopedia or, watch a basketball game on TV? What do you think? Watch a basketball game. I have choices. When you're here in class at school, what goes away? Choices. You're here, you can either choose to learn and engage and develop, or you can tune out and not develop. And I always go, given those two options, what's the only one that logically makes sense? Which one? Develop. Like, if you got a chance to develop, why would you not want to develop who you are, your understanding of the world, how you navigate that world? And so that brings us to like a couple ideas. So one of the things we talked about in terms of what makes somebody a better individual, we talk about social emotional learning. Being able to really understand the world around you, engage yourself in the world, and that's what we talk about. You guys are about to develop an intense amount over the next 4 years. Where? College. Now, part of that is due to the classes you're going to take, but a bigger part of it's going to be due to the people you meet, the environment. You're going to be independent. You're going to have to navigate relationships. You're going to meet new people, and you're going to develop, as opposed to the guy who stays sitting in his house and doesn't go to college and starts working as an electrician somewhere, and nothing wrong with that, but there's no continuing development the same way that when people go to college and they kind of engage the world in a different way. And with that, when we talk about classrooms, one of the issues people have with colleges actually get you to become closer to the information that you're doing. So high school's really rudimentary. It kind of covers surface topics. Especially at a public school, they can't really dive into anything because why? They don't want to make people mad. They have to follow strict guidelines on what they can teach, what they can't teach. And so there is no real critical thinking on a deep level because people are kind of afraid to navigate those kind of topics. And all those lead to having either a population that's informed or a population that's uninformed. And I mean this with 100% honesty. I don't care where you fall on the political spectrum. I really don't. But I want you to be an informed person. Somebody that knows why they feel what they feel. Someone that understands the world because they engaged with it and they learned, as opposed to, one of the things that's really getting me right now is you see a picture of a moon, like a picture of the moon or like astronauts on the moon on like a social media site, and one of the first things you see is 900 people laughing at the picture, saying this never happened. And you're just like, my Lord, it's like not being able to like engage in the world and see evidence and be confronted with evidence and be able to leave your little basement and your tinfoil hat and really be a part of the world and the information that's available to us out there. So the first thing I want your guys' group to do, from the time you're little kids, what are you taught about violence? It's never the answer. Violence is never the answer. Now, again, when you look at the world around us, we say it's the answer quite often, but we're taught it's not. So the first thing I want you guys to answer as a group is that warm-up question that's back there. Now, I want you guys as a group to make a pros and cons list. Okay, I'm going to give you about 3 or 4 or 5 minutes, somewhere in there, to just kind of navigate it, write it down. Is violent revolution ever justified in the fight for freedom, do you think? Now, you can ask questions in your own head, in your group, about what does freedom mean? Are there caveats to that? Are we talking about economic freedom? Are we talking about personal freedom? What are we talking about? But I want your group to come up with a kind of decision on whether you believe violent revolution is ever justified in the fight for freedom. All right, so go ahead, talk. You got about 3, 4, 5 minutes somewhere in there. I'll see how it's going, and make a pros and cons. What are the pros of violent revolution? What are the cons of violent revolution? All right, go ahead, go.
I would say sometimes, because like there's times where you're so oppressed, you get that feeling acceptable, like with someone that's hurt. But then sometimes, like, that's like for original people, like for other sides of freedom, it gets to be violent about it. You can be aggressive maybe, but not violent. Are you making a present?
I'm sorry, more suggestions.
What?
Lower all the
Similar to
it's just the
what about why should we just about
much of the time.
yeah.
I feel like telling them that just helps people realize, like, oh, this is a big issue. I mean, that's basically sending a strong message, but it grabs people's attention more than, like, a petition.
That's true. How do you find
It's
also that
It's a bad luck.
I think sometimes too, violence could like have you could have them solve anything.
does it count as violence? Kind of retaliation.
I think
Is that people can retaliate?
I asked, started like indirect, like how the test go? He's like, man, he got mad at me. He got mad at the whole class. And I was like, did you do anything? He's like, no.
Then when they get violent,
yeah, I feel like things like
that's true. Like they don't like.
fight back. You fight back when they have respect.
That's also true.
And I think
Revolution is a great
like for example, they killed all the kids.
That's true. Like
I mean, like
a violent kids test trying to change. That's not like the
So you're saying I'm gonna die.
I gotta switch cons, I guess. This kind of ties back to
as long as you're trying to
cause war.
maybe it's well. I was gonna say it's like you're trying to said no. If you like a black race tax,
Yeah,
I've never met someone Senate tax is also gonna hit everyone.
All right, about 1 more minute, so you should have a pros and cons list.
I guess they're kind of I guess
other people fall I guess like it's a more direct.
You're pretty quiet over there.
Decision, I guess, if that makes sense.
Retribution. Retribution.
Okay, so just again, you're just sharing offhand, each group kind of where you guys stood, and then some of the pros and cons that you see. If a group or two already talks about a specific pro or con, just skip that one, talk about something someone hasn't talked about, and just get a general idea of where we stand on this idea. Let's go with group 1 first.
Like I said, it's kind of like a chain reaction, or it kind of promotes that, like the like we obviously agree. I think our group agreed that violence was kind of justified in this, but also because of like the chain reaction and how it promotes the slavery movement. Because if you were to start, obviously like Nat Turner, he started, rebelling with solely a group of slaves and killing off the slave masters and stuff, that it can hopefully promote or encourage other groups to kind of fall in line and kind of do the same thing to show their voice. But and then like also a comment said though is it kind of worsens their outlook or reputation that this is a violent crowd and we have to take any means possible to try to limit their action.
Okay, that's good. Group 2, Cam's group. Anybody go?
I think it depends on like the situation. Like for personal freedom, we said it could be justified because like how else are you supposed to show that you want to fight for something that's better? And this like kind of ties in with the pros we said, with like sending a strong message and grabbing attention. But then we also saw grabbing attention as like it could also be a con, because then it'll give you like a bad reputation, a bad look. And then like with Nat Turner, for what we saw in Birth of a Nation, like more slaves suffered because of his actions.
Okay.
So yeah, that's kind of what we thought.
That's good. All right, group 3, Seabass.
Yeah, our group kind of just said something similar, that it just sends a message, and that it can enforce justice when it's like morally right, when they're in the moral right.
All right, group 4, Nico.
We put the same thing. I think it's just sending a message, but I think it also shows like a general display of how people feel or how some people are feeling in a population. But I think it has more cons than it does pros, especially since it harms people. And in the light of that situation, the general population who's like wavering on whether they should support it or not often takes the other side because of
All right, nice shot. Group 5, Reese's group.
We said there's more cons than pros to this, because having a violent revolution could lead to like more violence. It could be like a backlash, like it could be really ineffective.
Okay.
So that's why we think it's like not justified to have violent revolution.
Okay, nice. And then lastly, Robel's group.
Yeah, so we said kind of one of the pros of violence is you can't really dismiss it. Like with things like protests, you can kind of just dismiss that because it's people's words, but violence is like, it's kind of in your face. It's something you can't just look away from.
Nice. All good answers. And, and I think when I think of some of the things we have to look at, so what's one of the problems with that question?
It's circumstantial and it doesn't really give us circumstances.
Yeah, it's very broad. It's a very broad question that if I gave you a certain amount of information, you may be able to take a better position on it. And so, like I always think about, there's a difference. We have things like economic revolution, religious revolution or freedom in that sense, personal or physical, which is like slavery type of thing, and then say like political. And what else? What do I mean by this? The severity, is that what you said? Yeah. Okay. So the severity of how much that oppression is. The reason why this becomes important is, like, what revolution do we all think was justified? The American. We all say the American Revolution was justified. Really, the American Revolution was about what? Money. It was about money. This idea that England was this oppressive government, were they enslaving Americans? No. No. Were they even brutally beating up or violently hurting Americans for the most part? Not at all. We could argue there's a little bit of political denial, because what weren't the colonists allowed to do? Vote, have representation. But under a lot of this, we would argue that maybe why is the American Revolution seen as a positive thing?
Because it made America.
Because we're American.
Because we won.
Because we won.
Yeah.
It really is. If Nat Turner's slave revolt is successful, what do we say? It was justified. He ended slavery. Oh my gosh, what a great thing. And so it really is, a lot of it has to do with whether you won or didn't win. And because then what doesn't come into account that a bunch of you listed as one of the reasons why violent revolution may not be the answer?
Retribution.
The retribution that comes as a result of that. And so, but in reality, when we think about morality or justice, what shouldn't matter? The result or the aftermath of the event. And so it really becomes a kind of a more complicated thing. So really quickly, I just want to go over it before we go to that next phase, just so again you guys have a good understanding of kind of the circumstances of it all. So when we think about slavery in the 1800s, isolated or widespread? Widespread throughout the South, and not all of America, primarily the South, which is a big part of America though. Generally widespread. What were the conditions? Really bad. And how did those conditions change throughout the South? Who has any understanding?
I think they just worsened throughout the period of slavery.
Okay.
The more south you got, the worse they got.
The further south you got, and that was based on what?
The slave to non-slave population.
Beautiful. The ratio of slave to slave master, and the harsher slave codes, the farther down south you went, where that relationship grew in terms of favor toward the amount of slaves that somebody had down there. And so we had a South that was very harsh. That's not to say every slave owner was physically overbearing and brutal, but that was, generally the further south you went, that became more of a truth. And by 1800, Nat Turner's born. So Nat Turner's born in Virginia in 1800. From the movie and the little write-up, what were some characteristics about him as a kid?
Very intelligent.
Very intelligent. What else?
Curious.
Curious.
Religious.
Religious. Something else. When you say intelligent, how did intelligence manifest itself for him?
He could read.
He could read. And so this was an anomaly. This was very different. What did he believe about himself from a very young age?
That he was like sent from like God to like bring the slaves out of slavery.
Perfect. And from the movie, how did he develop that idea?
I think it was like a clip at the start when he was like really young. He was in like a circle of people and they were like doing dream. Oh, it was like it was a dream.
So he had visions and dreams about being kind of a, we would describe it kind of as a Messiah type, who was sent to kind of deliver from all that stuff. And so he grows up, he's taught to read. Now, one of the things we have to remember about the movie, what's wrong with the movie? Just in general, what's going to be wrong with the Hollywood movie?
It's a dramatization.
Yeah, it's going to be, we don't have all the information, so they got to do a lot of hole filling and things like that. Like there's a scene in the movie where his wife is raped. Now there's no actual, Nat Turner actually, in his confession, he kind of mentions her, but there's really no understanding of his wife. Why do you think they added that to the movie?
So you can like sympathize with her.
Kind of, yes.
Like he exaggerated how bad slavery was.
Raise tension.
Creates tension.
Kind of like in the book, like see like how like a close relationship would get separated so fast.
Good.
Gives more like justification for what he did.
It does give justification, but instead of saying it, what words you used?
Exaggerated.
It exaggerated or it gave an excuse. What was the truth about 1800s America on the plantations?
That's real. That it happened.
Huh?
That it happened.
Sexual assault happened. So when we look at just Virginia in 1850, there were 44,000 mulattoes. What's a mulatto? Mixed. So there were 44,000 mixed race black people, which meant that they were the products of interracial miscegenation between. Now, there's arguments, some people can say, well, maybe it was consensual. That's a rough road. Because of what?
The difference in power.
The power structure. So some might say she said I could do it, but she said you could do it because why? You were the master and you'd kill her if she said no. And so that tells us that there was a lot of sexual abuse, both through breeding and those things. And so the director of the movie said, let's throw in something that we all know was a major portion of slavery, and it helps us tell his story of whether it was his wife. Do you think Nat Turner knew a woman who was sexually assaulted by a white person?
Yes.
Yeah. And so now some people argue the other way and they say it ruins the movie because you added something that's an exaggeration and tried to justify it, when in reality, if we're able to kind of see a bigger picture, we understand it was a piece of it and a part of it. So, what's going on right around the time Nat Turner, 1825, 1830. So conditions are getting worse because what's happening in the South during that time? It was in the movie even. What was happening on the plantations?
Oh, it was like a drought.
It was a drought and there was a lot of economic turmoil happening. And so slave owners began cracking down more, making their slaves work longer and harder and denying them more and more food. And so tensions were rising, tensions are rising, it's getting worse, declining profits, we have all these kind of problems happening. So Nat Turner decides at that point that this is too much, as he's going plantation. What was one of the reasons he was able to understand it more? What happened that allowed him to understand it more?
Is when his master had him go preach to other plantations, he could kind of see like the other, treatment on other plantations.
Because what was the truth about Nat Turner's own plantation? Yeah, but no, I get your point was it was better than what he saw on the other plantations, and so for him, when he goes and he witnesses the experience of all slaves, he realizes how deeply horrid and horrendous the system is, even far beyond what he believed it to be in terms of horrid. And yeah.
Like even in terms of like how bad the system was, I remember you talking about like him being him growing up with the slave master's son and like hanging out with him as a little boy. But like when they both grew up, like they knew they kind of had to that relationship couldn't really be the same.
Yeah, so it's one of those. Even nowadays, it's kind of funny how that the relationship does change. When people look at a 5 or 6 year old African American boy, what do people say? Like he's walking, just skipping across the street, having fun, doing something. What do people do? Oh, how cute. There's at some point that kid matures to a place where like overnight he becomes dangerous and scary. And it really is, it's a weird phenomenon where people would always say there's a movie called Mississippi Burning and it's a black baby and the sheriff goes, wow, they're so cute when they're young. And it was just this general mindset that at some point they were going to become kind of bad. And so and one of the pieces of evidence they give for why his plantation was a little different, the grandma and grandpa were a little bit different. Their father was very religious, the mother was very kind of welcoming. Who taught him to read? The mom did. And so there was kind of this real kind of different experience for him. And then when he goes to the other plantations, he sees a very different world. And so, yeah.
Do you think like his rebellion still would have happened if he wasn't on such like a not like a good plantation, but like a different plantation?
Don't know. Like it's one of those where if he was not taught to read and never became a preacher, probably not. And so he had this perfect storm of being able to navigate the Virginia countryside, see all these experiences. He could communicate and what else did he learn to become during all that time? Who was he? He was a preacher, and even bigger than that, what was he? A leader. We think of the same way as we think of Cinque from Amistad. He was a leader. He was a strong person who risked his own life for the freedom of a bunch of people around him.
I was gonna ask, in the film when he was preaching at a plantation and saw that guy who was kind of resisting eating food and was kind of in the horse stall, getting his teeth chiseled out. Was that a way for Hollywood to exaggerate the situation, or was that?
Well, again, so that was the reason we don't know most of this stuff is the only thing we have from Nat Turner is his confession, which I'm gonna have you guys read in a minute. So but right before he was sentenced to hang, he went into a jail cell with somebody and he told his story. And they kind of jotted down those things. And so that's how we know. All that other stuff is constructed off of things we know about slavery and what slavery was like in those days. And so, again, not a lot of it is factually true down to the, one of the most famous cases of that, when I say the first major black film in this country, does anyone know what I'm talking about? It was a mini-series 5 letters. Starts with an R. Oh, that's disappointing. Has anyone ever heard of Roots? So when I was a kid, this was like 1975, 1976, Alex Haley, anyone heard the name Alex Haley? So he co-wrote Malcolm X's autobiography with him. Alex Haley produced this mini-series called Roots. And it was a 3-night epic. It was 3 hours every night. And I would go to bed, I was like 7 years old, 6 years old. I'd go to bed at like 6 o'clock so I could wake up again at 9 o'clock and watch it. Then my folks let me watch it and then go back to bed again. And really what it was the story of the African from being captured in Africa all the way through like 12 generations to freedom. And it was the first time the black story had ever been told to like mainstream America. And so Alex Haley wrote it. We had LeVar Burton, the guy from Reading Rainbow. He was in it. John Amos, a bunch of great actors were in it. But it told that story for the first time. Now, one of the problems with telling that story is what?
They didn't know all of it?
We don't know all of it. And so what did Alex Haley have to do?
Like, improvise?
He had to improvise. He took all the information he knew, he put it in. But critics quickly jumped on it saying, it's not true, he's lying. You know, and so they tried to derail the story. But again, it's one of those things that if you ever have time, it's an epic movie about resilience. We got into a discussion in U.S. history about stereotypes, and we were talking about sports notes, and we were talking about one of the things you have to, African Americans in this country are the story of perseverance and survival. From being taken in Africa and being walked 50 miles to the coast and having to surviving a boat ride 6 weeks to 2 months, making it to America, surviving through generation and generation and generation and generation and generation of oppression and all those things is just kind of a story of perseverance. And Nat Turner's story is one where somebody just ultimately broke and did something that traditionally hadn't been. The other thing that makes this thing so unique was, how often did slaves kill their masters? Almost never. Like it's insane when you think about it. Like we talked about the slave revolt on the Amistad, but we almost don't count that because why? When did it happen? On open ocean, or very early. And so we talk about, we get the slaves who fought, the Africans who fought to back their captors in Africa, makes total sense. The slaves who fought on the boats before they got to America, once they were in America and they were like solidified here, it almost stopped. We only have 4 documented cases of slave revolts. We have the Stono Rebellion in South Carolina, 1739, where 25 white people were killed. We're not going to have another one until 1800, Gabriel Prosser. And his is actually discovered before it happened, so 0. Then we have Denmark Vesey 23 years later in 1823. His is also discovered, 0. The fact that we bring up slave revolts that never happened as the famous slave revolts, it tells you about how rare Nat Turner's is going to be that actually carries it out. So Nat Turner decides, he plans, he collects a small group of people on his own plantation. And what's amazing again is, what did none of them do? Either said no or told anybody, which was again one of those, you're in constant fear. I mean, basically plotting a slave revolt, let's be real. Plotting a slave revolt in 1830 is essentially doing what? Committing suicide. On a lot of levels, it's committing suicide for you and everybody else who goes along, but they still kind of did it. So it starts in 1831. They start on their own plantation and kill everybody. This is where we start getting to where we start questioning things a little bit about the revolution, about the rebellion. Goes from plantation to plantation. Who do they kill? Everybody. Men, women, children. They end up killing roughly around 55 people die in the rebellion. When it's finally captured and stopped, roughly a couple hundred black people are slaughtered in the aftermath as a result. But what else happens in the aftermath? You guys talked about it.
Slave codes tighten.
Slave codes tighten a lot. oversight tightens. There's a lot of little things. I'm going to have you kind of go over those a little bit more. Nat Turner himself evades capture for a couple months, but eventually is captured himself, and he's executed, tried and executed, and kind of we get that legacy afterward where, depending on who you talk to, who's Nat Turner? He's one of two things.
Hero or villain?
He's a hero or villain. He's either a martyr or he's a perpetrator of violence. One of the two. And, you know, sadly, most people make their opinions, finish the sentence. Most people have their opinion despite not knowing anything about the actual rebellion, not knowing anything about slavery or what slavery was. And so, again, that's just kind of a general overview. What I want you guys to do in your group. So, groups 1, 3, and 5, you guys are going to be looking at the Nat Turner Confession side of this, which is this side. Okay? Groups 2, 4, and 6, you're going to be looking at the slave code side of this. Okay? I want you to read it, and I want you to kind of organize your idea. I'm going to give you a prompt in a minute, kind of, but really just read it, outline it. Yeah. Did I give one extra in the room? Yeah, so 1, 3, and 5, you're looking at the Nat Turner Confession, and 2, 4, and 6, you're looking at the slave codes and what happened as a result. I want the Nat Turner Confession, I want you to, what justification does he kind of give for the rebellion? What kind of quotes jump out at you of things that he said, kind of your interpretation of what those truly meant, what he meant by those, how those drove him. And then on the other side, I want you guys to look at how did the laws change exactly as a result of the rebellion itself. What exactly changed? Are these long-term changes? Are they, you know, what was the effect of these changes as a result of the rebellion? Yeah.
Can we write on the paper?
Yeah.